Well, I'm pretty excited to have a special guest in front of me. Gunditjmara woman, CEO of VACCHO, Treaty Commissioner. You've got two letters in front of your name, two letters behind your name. Is it Jill Gallagher or is it Auntie Jill or with AO? How shall I introduce you?
No, you call me Jill Gallagher. Jill Gallagher, GRSB.
GRSB.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Oh, you don't know what GRSB? Every blackfella should have GRSB after their name, and it means Grassroots Sovereign Blackfellas.
Right. Maybe I could have GRBS.
Grassroots Black Sovereigns.
No bullshit. Maybe an A. Bullshit A.
Well, we can have that too, but Paul, we won't go down that road, all right?
All right, I'll roll with GRBSA.
Yeah.
But anyway, yours are more famous.
Okay.
And I will refer to you as Jill Gallagher.
Yes,
so,
thank you.
Jill, how would you describe yourself?
How would I? Well, that's a really... No one's ever asked me that. It's hard to describe yourself, especially for all blackfellas, because they don't talk themselves up that much. Mm-hmm. We don't tend to do that. But I'm an Aboriginal woman. Mm-hmm. I'm a grandmother. I'm a mother, and I'm an auntie. I'm a niece, and the list goes on. I am 67 years old, which I'm not ashamed of. I mean, growing old in our culture is nothing to hide. It is something to be proud of. Anyways, so 67 years old. I have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. And I'm also a grandmother. That's amazing, isn't it? And it's because of her we can. I grew up not on my country, Paul. I said before I'm a Gunditjmara woman, but I didn't grow up in Western Victoria. I lived down there, but we didn't stay there long. We, at the time when I was a young girl, my mother, Frances Gallagher, had 10 children. Mm-hmm. I'm the 3rd youngest. And the only source of employment that our people could get back in that era, I mean, Mum was born in 1926, so she was born in an era where it really wasn't safe to be a blackfella, you know, and all the pain that our ancestors had to suffer for us to get where we're trying to achieve today. So I grew up on Gunditjmara country. For those who don't know where that is, that's Gippsland. Mm-hmm. Because we picked beans and picked potatoes and whatever else was in season, onions. So we used to camp all over Gunditjmara country. So my first school, primary school, was actually Cabbage Tree, right, which is up past Orbost. Right. In Gunditjmara country, and it was a little old logging town. A lot of blackfellas worked in the sawmills, yeah. And at one stage there in Orbost, there's a little place that Uncle Herb Patton sings about, and it's called Numarella Pines, and that's where a lot of the Aboriginal people lived up there on the hill that overlooks the whole plains of Orbost and the township. And that's where my 4 brothers were taken away and put in homes. Mm. So 4 of the boys, older boys, were all taken away and put in homes, and they weren't released until they were of age, which is 18. And my 2 older sisters were sent to Parramatta, which is in New South Wales. Mm. Yeah.
I want to go back to where you first described yourself,
yeah,
as grassroots, sovereign black. There's a number of blackfellas that would describe themselves like that, and they would be in similar positions to you, like yes, CEO, they hold whatever position they hold. Like, how does that, what does that make you feel? And tell me what burns inside you.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept when you hear a lot of our people refer to other members of the community as either elite blackfellas or you're not grassroots. I don't know what makes us as Aboriginal people grassroots, but all I know, that is my story. We moved to Collingwood, just around the corner from where I work, Easy Street, when I was about 9 years old. So I was still in primary school. And we've been here in Collingwood ever since. But the point that I'm making is, I left school at 13. My mum has been a labourer. When she was 16, she worked in the flax mills up near Hamilton. And we've never had a lot of our family go through school to the end and get a formal education. I think my mother and her lifestyle, and which then impacted on us, when we moved to Collingwood, and I went to George Street Primary School. I left school at 13 because I didn't like school, to be honest with you. But that, then again, apart from being Aboriginal, I was disadvantaged yet again by not having a formal education. So I've worked in the fields picking beans. I've worked in factories making fiberglass baths. When I was 12 and a half, I ran away from home here in Fitzroy, Collingwood, and I ended up in Winlayton. So what makes someone grassroots? I don't know when they try to differentiate a different class of blackfella. It's not right. I believe every Aboriginal person who has a lot of lived experience in being Aboriginal are grassroots. Whether they've got a doctorate in front of their name, whether they've got a professor in front of their name, or whether they've got multiple degrees, they are grassroots blackfellas.
There's a black sovereign movement out there that's talking about the no, but you're all these things of black sovereign, and you're voting yes. Why is Jill voting yes?
Why am I voting yes? For me to answer that, I've got to tell you a little story about my time as a Treaty Commissioner. So back in 2015, when the state government, when the Andrews government had a meeting up at the Aboriginal Advancement League, and that meeting was to invited all Aboriginal people in Victoria to attend. And the ones that turned up, the question that the bureaucrats asked Aboriginal people yet again, what does true self-determination mean to you as an Aboriginal person? And again, the Aboriginal mob that turned up to the League that time basically says, true self-determination for us is to be able to negotiate treaties and have empowerment and have a voice. So that's not a new ask, as we know, Paul. You know, our ancestors and our leaders in the past that are no longer with us have always called for a voice and have always called for treaties. So it was nothing new. But what was new about what happened in Victoria, we had a government that just did not dismiss it. So they said, let's explore how we do that. So the dilemma then was, because colonisation was very brutal and very quick in these parts of Australia, and we were the first to cop the brunt of colonisation, it did a lot of damage to our Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing. So we had to think, well, who does the state government talk to? Do they just talk to Jill Gallagher or do they talk to Paul Stewart? No. So we had to design a mechanism, a voice here in Victoria so that government could work out how are we going to negotiate treaties going forward. And that's the First People's Assembly of Victoria. Now, what struck me in my role as the treaty commissioner was not to negotiate. My role was not to negotiate treaties. My role was to set up a mechanism so treaties can be negotiated, which we did. And I thought it was going to be a no-brainer, can I tell you? I thought, because we've been calling for treaties for so long, I didn't think I'd get any opposition from our own mob. But there was opposition to it. And I don't think it was opposition to treaty, it was opposition to what's the design of this voice in Victoria going to look like. And so that's where the dilemma was. So there was a lot of Aboriginal, not a lot, there was some voices that were very, overpowering and powerful, and turned a lot of our own mob off in having a proper, meaningful, informed conversation about treaties. But so what I decided to do, because there's all these, everyone wants to sit around the table. Well, we can't have 68,000 Aboriginal people sitting around the table making decisions. Won't happen. So, but what I did learn from hearing Aboriginal voices was we don't want government to appoint our spokespeople. We actually want to elect them. And in a modern world, that's all we could do. I didn't know how to go back 250 years and look at the way we did it 250 years ago, because that's not there. In some places it is, but not all places. So we had to design a mechanism that is going to work in a modern world, and the First Peoples Assembly. Did I answer your question, Paul, or was I waffling on, mate? Please tell me if I waffle.
Oh, no, I think you're taking us down a path. Because what you've articulated is that it's tough to get mob around, 65,000 people, blackfellas. Geez, if that was the case, there'd be, imagine the media around that one.
Yes.
But it says to me, well, what you've articulated as well, is that we all don't agree.
No, exactly.
And so when it comes to the referendum that we're just about to go to, there is mob that disagree and are voting no.
Yes.
So, the polls are saying clearly that 80% of Aboriginal people are going to be voting yes, and we respect the other 20.
Yes.
So I guess, but if you choose to vote yes, does that actually mean you're not grassroots?
No, of course it doesn't. And the reason I'm voting yes is because I still have my mum with me today, so I'm very lucky. Not many Aboriginal people, as you know, live to my mother's age, still alive to talk about some of the horrors that happened to her in her lifetime as an Aboriginal woman, and to have 6 of her children ripped out of her life because her children were black, that pain alone. I have seen the disempowerment of our people for the past, since I've been alive. I have seen it through Mum's voice and Mum's stories, the disempowerment that our people have felt over the past 250 years. But more importantly too, I think there's a publication that I would encourage you to Google and read this publication. It's a publication of letters from Victorian Aboriginal women who were residing on missions back in the day. And when you read those letters, you hear the despair. You hear the disempowerment. And you hear the hurt. And I hear that in my mother's voice when she talks about her time on the mission. And her time when she found it hard to get a job or even go into a hotel to get a meal because she was denied that. So you hear that. That's why I am voting yes. I don't know. I mean, I've been heavily involved, as you know, Paul. I've been heavily involved in the crafting of the Uluru Statements. when the Melbourne dialogues happened, both myself and Jeremy Clark were the Victoria State, I think we were called facilitators back then. And then we got to go to Uluru, and then we got to hear all the stories from right across this continent, and then we got to see the crafting of the Uluru statements. So I'm voting yes because I believe for us as the first peoples of this country to be recognised in Australia's constitution, because we were denied that back in 1901. We were denied when a bunch of white old men sat around here in Melbourne and designed the constitution. There was a big debate happening. And that debate was, should we include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? And the end result was no.
Can we all agree? Can we all agree to disagree? Like, where do you fit in this sort of numbers game?
I think, well, of course I sit within the 80%, but I think the expectation that we place on ourselves to not only do the rest of the public expect that we have to have 100% consensus, it's ludicrous. We don't expect that of any other peoples on this land or in the world. We don't expect 100% consensus, and you're never going to get it. And that's fine. But you've got to go with what the majority are asking for. And the majority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are asking for a voice to parliaments and to be enshrined in the Constitution so no government can get rid of it. The majority of Aboriginal people are asking that one of the oldest living cultures on the planet is recognised that all Australians have in their own backyard. And by the way, that doesn't mean we're going to take their backyard. I need to say that. We are not in any way, shape or form interested in anyone's backyards.
Let's go back to this 80% and the majority. We want to keep going on this. Like, why do we have to get 100%?
Well, we don't.
Why can't we?
Why can't we? Well, that's a very good question, and I don't pretend to know what's in the 20% of our mob's minds. I don't understand. But can I say, some of the... when I was the Treaty Commissioner, and this story is a little bit... I get a little bit emotional when I talk about this story. When I was a Treaty Commissioner, I had conversations with a lot of Aboriginal people in Victoria. People who were unemployed, people who were in prison, Aboriginal people who are in prisons, Aboriginal people who are just mums and dads, Aboriginal people who are professors and doctors and lawyers and the list goes on, or as many Aboriginal people I could talk to in various settings, whether it was just around the kitchen table or whether it was in big forums. And I've forgotten what the question was.
Sad story.
The sad story. And I saw a lot of pain and a lot of trauma in a lot of our people's hurt. And there was one woman down in Gunai country, and she was a lot older than me, and I was down there talking to an elders council about treaty. And she just let her trauma come to the surface. And she said to me, "What would you know about trauma, Jill Gallagher? You wouldn't have experienced people spitting on me in the streets, or people won't let us access anything because my skin is black. What would you as a Treaty Commissioner know about trauma and hurt and hate?" And to me, I took no offence to that, because that was her hurt and her trauma coming out. I see a lot of our people like that. And a lot of our people think also that if we are recognised in the Constitution, that it's going to cede our sovereignty. It's not. no one can cede your sovereignty, your sovereign identity and who you are as an Aboriginal person. No one can do that unless you sign a document that says you're ceding it. And I don't know of any blackfella that's done that. So, and to be counted in the 67 referendum, which they altered the Constitution to allow that, I mean, if that was true, we would have ceded our sovereignty already, but we haven't. We've got a government here in Victoria, and hopefully one day we'll have a government at the national level that will put seriously treaties proper on the table. And I think the other thing is that just recently I had the amazing opportunity to go to Rwanda at a international gender equality women's forum from women from all around the world. And it didn't just struck me a few months ago, I knew this anyways, but when you go travel overseas, you hear and you see cultures. You learn about the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians and the Incas. You learn about all those cultures in school. When you go overseas, that's what you want to see. No one knows about our cultures in this continent, in this country. No one knows that our people, our ancestors, Paul, your ancestors and mine, walked with dinosaurs 35,000 years ago. That's older than the pyramids, mate. And so being recognised as the first peoples of this country on an international platform, it will give us that recognition.
Yeah. We are going to a referendum, and there's still a few on the fence.
Yeah.
There's a few non-Aboriginal people on the fence. What would you say to them if they're listening in?
What would I say with them?
Or to them?
To them. I would say to all Australian citizens, come walk with us, stand with us, make change. You've got nothing to fear and you've got everything to gain.
Well, I want to fast forward. We think it's going to be October 14.
Yep.
Well, that's the rumour, but I don't know much anyway. Let's pretend it is. October 15, Jill Gallagher wakes up and there's a no vote. How does Jill Gallagher feel?
I don't know, because that won't happen. There won't be a no vote.
All right. Well, let's flip it then.
I knew you were going to do that.
It's October 15 and Jill Gallagher wakes up and there's a yes vote. How does Jill Gallagher feel?
I'm going to feel on top of the world. I'm going to feel that the rest of this country values us as the First Peoples and values our cultures as the First Peoples.
Well, there's going to be people listening. What is Jill Gallagher's last words that you want to say?
Oh, my last words. Wow. What I want to say to our own mobs, our own communities out there, we've got nothing to lose. We've got nothing now. We don't have a voice now. So we've got nothing to lose. We're not going to cede our sovereignty. And we might make a difference if empowerment and hope is back in our families and in our communities. So please vote yes, because we have nothing now. To the non-Aboriginal people, we're not blaming you for the past, because you're not responsible for your ancestors. But you're responsible to stop being bystanders and help us make change, the change that we need. And our culture could be part of Australia's fabric. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill Gallagher.